always the starting point of a hybrid studio, because that means digital and analog, is the analog part. And Big 6 is our newest release in terms of our smaller desks. And it's an evolution of Small 6, or Little 6. It's not called Little 6, it's just 6, and that's not to scale. Bit skewed, we'll go with it. But what do you need inside of a desk of, what do you need inside of a desk of this size in your home studio? Well, you need to be able to record, so you need some money channels, some preamps, some EQs, maybe some compression. Maybe you've got synths, maybe you've got DJ equipment as well. Well, then you want some stereo channels. How do you hear things back? Do you want zero latency monitoring for your artist? Probably yes. Well, no, not probably yes, yes. And then what about your monitors inside of your studio? Do you have 2 sets of monitors? Do you have external sources coming in? If you think about this in the context of just doing it inside of the box, there's a lot of routing and a lot of stuff that goes all over the place and a lot of latency at that point that you start adding in. So we need a centerpiece, and that's what Big 6 is designed to be. Okay, so I'm going to swing around so I actually know what I'm looking at because it's tiny on here. So as I said, you've got your mic inputs, we've got balanced inputs to the desk as well on the mono channels, we've got our stereo channels over here, and we are going to run through these in a minute as separates, but just so you can see what the front panel looks like here. As you come down, you've got Q stereos, which are for our artist monitoring. You have, or can be used as effect sense. You then got the EQ, which is a slightly different EQ to what is inside of 6. It's a slightly adapted EQ with a midband now as well. We've got the channel compressor. We've got our 100mm faders, so this feels like a proper console. We've got our metering. We've got multiple mix buses inside of it, so both a mix A and B bus, and we're going to look at that in a minute. As I said, we've got our stereo channels. These have got our EQ, they've got our sends to our Q stereos as well. And as you come across, you've then got your listen mic circuit on the talkback input, the bus compressor, so the SSL bus compressor, but a smaller version. Your master bus and master metering. Coming down, you've got your external inputs, you've then got your monitor section, and you've got your master fader. The important part about this image, though, is that connection, the USB-C connection. So whereas the 6 doesn't have an audio interface on it, it's designed to integrate with other products, Big 6 does. And we've got a 16IO audio interface that has been integrated in some really clever ways for sending to and from the DAW. One of the things I will show you later on is how we can loop out of the Q stereos back in through the interface into the DAW, use a plug-in for reverb or delay as an example, and then bring that back out and sum it into the desk as if it's a hardware outboard unit. And all it takes is a button press to do that. There's no any patch cabling or anything, it's all inside of the desk. As you can see on the back of this as well, everything is on TRS inputs at that point. So whereas we had to fit a lot inside of 6, i.e. the D subs on the back, you know, there's quite a bit of space. Oh, sorry, there's quite a bit of I/O for a very small amount of space on the back of the 6. We've been able to break that out across the TRSs here for this one. So, the mocamp side of things. There are 4 super analog mono channels on Big 6, and again, we talked about super analog circuitry earlier on, okay? And that's what is the front end of this console, okay? And if you look, you've got both your mic and line input section here, and as you come across, you'll see how this flips to the USB as well for the returns into the channel strips. So the mic and line side of things is essentially derived from our larger format consoles. So when you're thinking of a small part of SSL in your studio, think of the bigger consoles also. Now, what time have we got? Just checking. Oh, there it is. Trying to look at 19. I've got a great view of my chin from that angle then. Look. We talked about artist monitoring earlier on. Now, one of the biggest things that is a benefit in the world of analog is being able to just send someone something a little bit more quickly. If you're in a studio, you've got a drummer in the room, or you've got a whole band in the room playing together, and you've got people shouting at you, I want more guitar, I got more drums. If you're going to do that with a mouse, you're all over the place. If you've got an analog desk with knobs in front of you, you can just walk across it and turn things up to each monitoring bus. It's speed, it makes the artist feel more comfortable, and also it's zero latency at this point because it's analog. Now I know we can do low latency inside of the door and all sorts of things, but true zero latency and just being able to grab it is really useful. As I said also, these can be used as effect sends. So we can use these to send off to effects and do some clever things with them. So we will look at that. Now, we had both a high band and a low band of EQ on 6. And one of the things we wanted to introduce on Big 6 was a midband for you. So the way to think of this is it's quite a broad stroke EQ. So we've got high and low shelving filters at 3.5K and 60 Hertz, and these can also be switched into bell modes as well, and that changes where they sit. So it gives you either a 5 kilohertz or a 200 Hertz bell mode. You've then got a fixed midband, which is 700 Hertz, so you can cut some of that sort of mid-range, I won't call it like, it's where frequencies tend to build up a lot is in the mid-range. So you can create space, or with a snare drum boost into it, give it a bit more weight. The way to think of this EQ is it's a broad stroke EQ. Okay, so this is like final EQing, maybe some compression over the buses and stuff like that. It's not like the E-Series full channel strip where you can go in, create a really tight Q and cut it out. It's designed as broad stroke EQ and it works on multiple sources really well. And when we were designing it, that's what we wanted to achieve. It wasn't just like a one trick, it should be able to work across multiple sources really well. So introducing the midband up from what the Little 6 did, I'm going to call it Little 6 for this purpose, it's just a little bit extra flexibility for you inside of that as well. Next to that though, we have the SSL Dynamics inside of this, okay? Now, the dynamics inside of Big 6 very much based around the circuitry of what 6 was, Little 6, say again in this purpose. The one thing we have changed though is the knee of the circuit. So one thing we had feedback on was the 6, or the Little 6 as I keep calling it, had quite a hard knee, okay? And when you had a lot of sub-bass frequencies going through it, you could find it would jump sometimes. For drums, this is great because you've got that really snappy SSL drum sound. So we've adjusted this to have a slightly softer knee, so it works at a wider range of sources a little bit better. So I think that's quite important. Inserts, that's also really important. So the insert points on the desk allow you to add outboard equipment, whether it be some of our 500 series stuff, whether you've got a Pultec EQ, whatever you might have, you have the ability to add this inside of the analog path. So all of the mono channels there have those insert points available to you. And as you come down, we've got the 100mm fader that we talked about as well earlier on. You can see here we've got our metering, and we've got some buttons here which are really quite useful because these are how we bring the feed point of the USB path inside of the desk out to the workstation, so pre or post fader at that point. Also, the important part is the fact that we've got this B bus. So by default, we're going to the Mix A bus, okay? What if you want a secondary bus for maybe doing some parallel compression over, or you want to group things out and bring that back in? You could do some clever stuff with it. And by hitting the mute key, it brings that out of the B bus and we can loop that back in if we want to on some insert points or whatever we might want to do in terms of mix busing. So again, it becomes useful because it's a second bus that we can use for multiple things. Either, like I said, grouping down or using it maybe as like a parallel hard. It's really useful for those sort of things. I think the thing that's really important next though is the stereo channels, because modern studios, you tend to find people have synthesizers, they've got some form of keys-based item. Do you want to eat up your main money channels with these when you get line outputs? Stereo channels are really useful at this point. So the 4 stereo channels make complete sense. And again, for summing, which is what we're doing inside of this, they're really useful. Monitoring is the other thing inside of the desk. So whereas inside of the DAW, you're normally going into a software interface for monitoring on your channels and on your outputs. For this, you've got it all in front of you. And the really nice thing about it is you can sum multiple sources together. So a lot of places, in terms of your DAW and your control panel software, bringing multiple sources together is a little bit of a pain. Whereas inside of this, you could have 3 or 4 sources coming back, i.e. a mix bus, an external input, whatever it might be, and you can sum them together really simply inside of the master section. At the top, you've got your stereo bus compressor, and I think that's one thing that people really like about the desk. The thing that we've added on this is the auto-release feature. And the auto-release feature is something you find used all the time on the SSL Bus Comp, when it's in bigger studios on the bigger desks. And this is content dependent, so program dependent what's going into it. If you've got a more constant source of input going into it, it slows down the release. If you've got a snare drum that's going in one by one, the release becomes faster, so it pumps and it moves more. And that's the thing with the auto release that people really like. So the SSL Bus Compressor in that sense is really, really useful. It's got a 4:1 ratio, 30 milliseconds attack, and by default it's the 100 milliseconds release on that if you don't have the auto release in. So quite a varied compressor for what it is inside of such a small unit. Anyone here that used the Listen Mic compressor before? Yeah? Yeah, so the Listen Mic compressor, the classic 80s drum sound. We have a talkback in, which we can use for speaking to artists over the Q section, but we also have the LMC in as well. And the LMC allows us to add that crunch to the drum sound that so many people love, and that can be used as well and recorded back. So that is a brief overview of Big Six, and I want to make sure we fit enough into this hour that this whole system makes sense. And I think no more room is quite an interesting phrase. Well, what about limitations, practical limitations? What does a studio in a DAW mean? So when you think of a big studio that you might go into, a commercial facility, do you have unlimited, 1176s in a rack? Do you have unlimited SSL 384 bus compressors in a rack? Do we have that ability to multiple stack plugins in our DAW practically as much as we want? When we do that, how often do we find ourselves removing them after playing with them for hours because it's just ruining what we're doing? We've stacked 4 or 5 plugins on multiple channels and it actually hasn't made it any better. Sometimes more is less. And that's what I'm talking about with practical limitations. So that's where adding this into the equation comes in. Control. So what's one of the things when you go into a big analog studio that you've got across in front of you on a desk? You have an EQ and you have a set of dynamics on every channel. That's what the UC1 brings to the equation. Let's jump out of here real quick. So UC1. This works inside of the SSL 360 platform. So if you had a UF8, it would appear inside of here as well. So if we go back to the home page, you can see the UC1 sits here. If you had a UF8, that would appear here as well. And the thing that I've clicked on is the plugin mixer. What I like to do inside of my DAW is I like to set up a template. I've set myself 48 channels, and each of those channels has one of the SSL channel strip plugins on it. Okay, that's a 48 channel desk at that point. I then give myself a couple of spare channels at the end where I put maybe 5 1176s, some DBXs in there, and I use that as almost an outboard rec, and I'll drag those into position when I'm using them. Because one of the things that made certain sounds inside of studios was the limitation of the equipment you had there. You had to be creative with it. Yeah, you had to commit sounds to tape. And that's something we've sort of forgotten these days because we've got unlimited undo and we can stack as many plugins as we want. So what I want you guys to think about after walking away from this is, well, maybe I should set myself some practical limitations inside of my DAW because it might change the way I work and create sounds. And I found it really useful. So what I do inside of this, as I said, if I go to Logic here, I'll show you. On every channel, as a start point, I've got one of the SSL, it's the wrong thing, sorry, wrong one. I've got one of the SSL channel strips. And what the UC1 allows me to do is not even look at that screen. So if I unmute this here, let's check this is going to be right. I can go inside of this, and because I've got a plug-in on every channel, if I press solo on the UC1, it then essentially cuts the audio going through all the other plugins. So it's essentially a hard solo inside of the SSL platform. So if I hit that, that's the rack tom at the moment, wrong one. Come back to snare, there we go. There's our snare, okay? I'm not looking at the screen, I don't know what's going on. I can hit in with the EQ, and I can start. And then I can go drop it in and out. Okay, I can't really hear much. I'm monitoring backwards, looking left and right, but give me that saving grace. EQ in and out there, I can listen to that. Then I can go, all right, maybe I'll put some compression on that. Yeah? Or maybe I'll go and I'll actually drop the gate in there. Yeah? And I can go through then and say, right, that's cool. How about we go, wrong one, there we go. I select from that point, solo clear, and I'll go and find, of course it's stopped. It's going to loop round now, there we go. That's just the bane of demoing ever, is it will stop when you're trying to do something. So, let's go find the guitar. Yeah, you can see this is following what I'm doing. So it's really, really quite useful. The other thing inside of this is you can also pull up the bus compressors. So we've got a bus compressor here. So if I bring these out, I've got the bus compressors, and I can go and choose the bus compressor. And just to show you this as well, all of that appears inside of the 360 mixer, one-to-one. So if you want to, you didn't even have to look at Logic or Pro Tools, whatever it might be. You could start inside of this and start building things up. Look on the right, you can have up to 8 bus compressors up on there, and I can go through and grab the settings on all of these. Yeah, and that's my parallel compression inside of this. So without even having to think about what my mouse is doing, mixing with my eyes, I'm listening, I'm pushing levels around, and I've got it all in front of me on a controller that's laid out like an SSL channel strip. So at that point, what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at a set of analog summing. So probably we'll bring out some key elements into the big six, like a kick drum, a vocal, or something like that we want to process on the mono channels. And then we start bringing out other stems as we go down. We good, guys?
You're all good. I just want to change your mic quick if possible.
Is it gone?
No, it's still there, but I just don't want it to go.
Okay, cool. So we start bringing in things through the buses at that point, okay? So all we have to do at the top of the channel strip, instead of going from our dedicated line input, we just hit the From USB button at the top of the channels as we go across, and that flips to our, please hold. So that flips essentially our outputs from Logic or Pro Tools back in the analog circuitry of the console. So you don't have to think about any hard routing inside of a software window or anything like that. If you go from output 1, you're back into input 1 here on the USB side of things. Then we start to think about, well, how could we use this in terms of, that's down here. We start to think about how we could use this in terms of effects. So let's have a little look here. What I've got is a reverb setup. So this is the SSL Flex Verb. I've got that set up here. If I go over here, you guys might be able to see this with your camera. What I've got set up is essentially the stereo Q1 to send out of the USB outputs into the console. So what they do is they go out of the console, And back in on inputs, I'll show you quickly so you can see this. 11 and 12. So they return into the desk as if they're appearing as an input from the sound card. That then runs down and goes through the reverb. And at that point, I can start sending level into it. So if you look here, yeah, you can see the level is extreme. It might be the 80s, we could add the LMC on it, who knows. But we're starting to push that in. Now, what I've then done is I've pushed that back out of the desk, out of, on that one, 9 and 10. So we've got that in here. And we can bring that back in. So we're then summing it back in the analog domain to the final mix bus. So if you wanted to, you could do this with multiple things, but this is how you start to make use of the creative things inside of the desk. The clever routing of taking audio out from certain paths, bringing it back in. If you really wanted to, if you wanted to have more analog processing to everything, you could start mixing through the mono channels for everything and then print them back in again and then start to stem them back out into the desk. So you're really starting to build the hybrid workflow at that point. Where are we at? 5 minutes really, and then you want to do questions. So you can be really creative what this is as a product. I've even got people using these as a rehearsal mixer for their band. So plugging in Kempers into them, electric kits, a couple of money channels for vocals, and then they're all going out of the headphone outputs on it, and using that as a high quality rehearsal mixer. So it's quite a cool way of doing things. The other thing we wanted to look at today was both the Fusion and the Bus Plus. I'll give you an overview of these. As I said, we could spend a couple of hours on each. The whole concept behind the Fusion and the Bus Plus was to, well, number one, Fusion was to be a set of tones, a set of colours for your master bus that allowed you to be creative, allowed you to add that colour back in. So we've got elements such as the vintage drive circuit for adding harmonic distortion. We do have a transformer inside of this that you turn on, and that's where I always start. So just to show you that quickly. This is obviously a fantastic mix now with a lot of reverb. And of course it stopped. So let's start with all these out. Hopefully this comes across in the recording and what you guys have got. Right. So, no Bus Plus, no anything at this point, okay? Always meters because we've got signal going into it. Right, firstly I'll drop the transformer in. Listen to the low weight in the snare and also the kick drum. Without. Yeah, so just immediate what transformers do, that girth and that weight in the lower mids. Slight shift in the high end. Then you've got the vintage drive. Now this does introduce some level change at this point, so we can trim back on that. We then have the Violet EQ, which we both have fixed frequency points, so it's designed for sort of touching things in and overall mix EQ than anything. So I've got that set to 50 Hertz on the low end. All right, so we're not going to go that high, but I'm going to give it probably 1.5, 2 dBs there. And then you can really push the high frequency on this and have it not sound harsh. But what that also then allows you to do is use the high frequency compressor, and this gives you the effect of what tape would used to do, where you push into it and it would roll and pull the high frequencies back in. So what I like to do is set the threshold at roughly, the frequency response of that, the crossover of roughly the same as where we're boosting on the Violet. So without, just rounds that top back in, so you can over boost and then tame it back in. So that, again, that's down to taste of that one. And then the final on that is the stereo width. So space allows you to push wide, and width brings low end frequencies more center. So what you would tend to do when you were cutting to vinyl, bringing lower end frequencies more center, so you're not making the needle jump all over the place on the cutting lathe. And then we have the insert point, and that insert point here is dropping in the Bus Plus. Now, the Bus Plus, drop this for a second. like I said, is the next generation of what the classic SSL bus compressor is. Let me find it in here for you so you've got it in front of you as well. Bus Plus, when we set out to do the next version of the bus compressor, how do you go and better something that is known as a classic inside of the studio industry is a start point? You know, that's quite a hard challenge. So one of the challenges for our design team was to create new and exciting elements to the bus compressor, and my colleague Matteo has done very well on that. Number one, he's introduced a dynamic EQ inside of this, and that is completely separate to what the bus compressor is doing. It could be both pre and post the bus compressor. We almost went back to Goldmember then. And the whole point behind this is it allows you to carve a bit of space inside of a mix around the compression. So just that little bit more dynamic control of an overall bus. But when used in dual mono mode, this can be really useful in individual instruments as well. So that brings me to the next point, is we've got multiple modes inside of this. And we've got classic stereo, where either the left or right side would take priority into the side chain. You have summed side chains, so you use both sides of the input to the key. We have dual mono, which is obviously dual mono, left, right, and then we have a mid-side mode as well. So these are four new, well, one of them was existing already, but three new functions on top of that inside of the bus compressor. So again, this immediately varies what the bus compressor can do. 4K mode. This allows you to vary the amount of harmonics that the compressor is introducing. So you can go up to pretty extreme, and I'll show you this actually. So if you're listening sort of low mids again, with that crunch come in. And that's really variable on for what you want to use it for. I mean, I use it on about 3 clicks in. Where are we? About there. So it's just adding a bit more harmonic distortion of what the older 4K style compressor would have done with the unbalanced VCA side of things. Now, another mode inside of this is the low THD mode, and this is essentially taking some of that harmonic distortion back out and allowing the compressor to be more linear in the way it responds, and you can really feel this inside of it. So again, if we listen to that, just creates that little bit more space in what the compressor is doing. You can just hear it in the cymbals. So they're always going to happen, sort of thing. I don't want to rush through this too much, because I said this would be a couple of hours, and we could demo on this in its own right. So I just want to give you a bit of an overview of what's going on. One of the other modes that we've added in here is the feedback mode. So the bus compressor is actually a hybrid feed-forward feedback compressor by its design. This allows us to turn the compressor into a feedback compressor. It changes the way the compressor circuit is reacting and how it feels when you're compressing and using the circuit. So that's numerous things added on top of what a classic SSL bus compressor is straight away. You've got the dynamic EQ, you've got the different operation modes for the side chain, you've got the ability to adjust the amount of harmonic distortion that we're getting from the 4K mode. We can have it as a low THD mode, so it's adjusting the way the compressor is reacting in terms of its linearity. And then you have got the feedback mode as well. It's taking it from a hybrid feed-forward feedback compressor into a feedback compressor. I'm wary of time, so we won't delve into these too much more. As I said, there could be hours on these in their own right. But what I want you guys to walk away with thinking is, how can I build a hybrid studio out of components, and what practical limitations can I put in place just to save me running away for hours, going down a rabbit hole of plugins and all sorts of things, when you can create a more focused workflow for yourselves like you would have in an analog studio. So that's kind of what I wanted to get to with it. So a lot to fit into an hour.